He is very sophisticated for a guy who comes off maybe as a little old-fashioned. He's very sophisticated about the way the media works in our country and appeals to, I'll say again, tens of millions of progressives who don't want this election to be about ideas and drama, but to be about progressive ideas.
Mark, I think you're right. He's got a couple other attributes which make him a bit more of a threat than would ordinarily be the case. I think Americans love authenticity, and they think there's not a lot of it in politics today. And Bernie Sanders, like him or not, is authentic. That was vintage Bernie today. And secondly, something that I think transcends ideology, there is a populist streak. You see it some in the Republican Party, some in the right wing, some in the Tea Party movement, an anti-Wall Street. I don't think there's a great clamor of support for billionaires in America today. So he's tapping into something that could conceivably enable him to slightly broaden that rather narrow base on the left that he enjoys.
Al, just talk about him as a performer again. He always bristles a little bit when John and I try to talk to him about his family, as I said, and his personality. But it wasn't a very happy warrior out there today. Does he have a chance to broaden his appeal if he does talk a little bit more optimistically about what he'd like to do rather than denouncing corporations, denouncing the wealthy?
Well, if he makes a scary face like he does to you and John, he petrified John last time. maybe that. I don't think humor is going to be Bernie's trademark. He's an enjoyable guy to chat with. I think he actually has, as Kate said earlier, a decent relationship with his colleagues. He occasionally is turned into a decent legislator. He and John McCain put together the Veterans Reform Package a year or so ago. But I don't think that Bernie's going to be the Hubert Humphrey of 2016. He's really not a happy warrior. He's going to be much more of a scolding warrior.
Yeah. Kate Hunter, back on Capitol Hill. What did you see today in Bernie Sanders? A big day for him, first time ever as an announced presidential candidate. Is what everybody else saw what you see every day up there, or was there anything different about how he was behaving given his new status in the world?
Well, I think you saw a classic Bernie Sanders. I mean, this is what we hear from him, on Capitol Hill every day in terms of his, devotion to certain issues. One of the things that struck me is that he talked about, wanting to have basically a competition of ideas, to talk about, being in the race to sort of both see if it's possible for someone who isn't going to take money from billionaires and from, corporations to be able to mount a viable candidacy, almost like as if it's an experiment to see if this will really work, and also to kind of bring his sort of ideas to the table and the policies that he wants to see. And I think that's been very similar to the role that he's taken on in the Senate over his time, both in the Senate and in the House.
Kate, do you think people like the senator from Massachusetts, the senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown? Do you think any of Bernie Sanders' colleagues, out of ideological solidarity, the more liberal ones, will endorse him?
Well, that'll be one of the most interesting things to watch. Actually, as he was walking away after the press conference, myself and several other people, the rather short press conference, myself and several other people went up to him, and one of the questions we asked was whether he was going to keep his his independent party affiliation in the Senate now that he's running as a Democrat for the presidency. And he didn't answer that or answer any of the other questions, but it'll be interesting to see whether his Democratic colleagues who he now caucus with, whether any of those that you mentioned, Elizabeth Warren, Sherrod Brown, folks like that, whether they come out to endorse him.
Al, I'm not familiar with all the current ballot rules, but I remember from past campaigns, it seems to me in some states he might have to be a Democrat to be the nominee of that state and to win delegates, right?
Yeah, Mark,
well, exactly.
I'm not familiar either, but
Go ahead, Al.
I'm sorry, Kate. I'm sorry, Kate. Kate may know more about that than I do. I think that's a technicality that's pretty easy to bridge. There's not, there's no vote for another 9 months, and so
right.
I think that's not hard to do.
Right. Kate, just a closing thought from you in terms of Bernie Sanders. We've seen with the 3 Republican senators who are announced candidates for their party's nomination, a real tension in the case of Senator Cruz, for instance, missing a fair number of votes, trying to balance the Senate platform and their day job with running for president. Would you expect Bernie Sanders now to continue to be up on Capitol Hill a lot, or is your understanding or sense that he'll be focused more on trying to win the nomination than doing the duties the people of Vermont sent him to Washington to do?
Well, certainly in the next week or two, he's going to be very involved in getting final passage of the budget resolution that he's a pretty strong opponent of. It's a Republican-crafted budget resolution, so he'll be pretty involved in that. But he's also planning a more formal campaign announcement up in Vermont, I think in May. And so certainly we'll be seeing him. He's been traveling a bit over the last several months to primary states to sort of get ready for today. But I would imagine we'd see that ramp up in the next couple weeks as he, hits the trail more ardently.
Right. Al, share your curiosities with the world. What are the next 2 or 3 things you're looking to see happen now that Sanders is an announced candidate that you think will tell the tale of how influential he is in the nomination fight?
2 things, Mark. How Senator Secretary Clinton responds over the next month and how seriously she appears to take it. Secondly, where will Bernie go? I think he'll be out there, as Kate said. Will the focus be heavily on New Hampshire, where I think he could be a real sleeper candidate, not to win, but again, a Buchanan analogy. A lot of independents will vote in that Republican primary. They tend to be more moderate, which leaves the Democratic vote in that primary a little bit more to the left. Will he do that, or will he also try to compete heavily in Iowa, too? He could spread himself too thin.
Yeah. Al, I just add a third thing to that, which I'm curious to see how he does in that online fundraising that he said, the small dollars that he said would be so important. We'll see how he does with the publicity of the announcement. Again, I'll say for the third time, tens of millions of Americans will find this an appealing message. We'll see if they get on board the Sanders train.